In her small Manhattan apartment, Elizabeth stared at her cell phone with a deep sigh. The screen showed more than 10 missed calls from her mother. December had just begun, and it was already the busiest time at work. "I want to have a big Christmas celebration at home this year with all the relatives. You'll buy presents for everyone, won't you? You're so good at choosing gifts." Her mother's voice carried that familiar wheedling tone. Elizabeth closed her eyes and gently massaged her temples. Piles of tax returns with next week's deadline were stacked on her desk. "Mom, I'm really busy this year." Before she could finish, her mother's crying voice came through the phone. "You're all I can count on. Don't you care about your family?" This tactic again, Elizabeth thought. But the guilt that had been ingrained for over 10 years wouldn't easily disappear. "All right. How many people?" "Let's see, about 15 people. Feel free to spend whatever you need. I know you'll choose wonderful things." Elizabeth did the math. Even at $50 per person, that would be $750. Combined with this month's support money, she'd have to dip into her savings. "Got it." Just as she hung up, a message arrived from her sister Caitlin. "Don't forget my present, the new Louis Vuitton bag." "You absolutely can't forget." Elizabeth quietly turned her smartphone face down and tried to return to work. At that moment, snow began to fall outside. White crystals sparkled fleetingly in the streetlight. Suddenly, she remembered the parting 10 years ago. It had been snowing that day too. When her parents' divorce was finalized, and her father was leaving the house. Her mother had collapsed in tears, saying, "That man never gave us anything," and Elizabeth had sided with her mother without hesitation. She hadn't spoken to her father since. It happened while she was shopping alone for presents at the mall. Elizabeth's eyes met her father's. Richard Walker was also shopping for presents alone. After a moment's hesitation, he approached. "How have you been?" His voice carried a mix of concern and nostalgia. Elizabeth tried to respond coldly, but her heart tightened at her father's tired expression. "I'm fine." There was no further conversation. Elizabeth hurried away to another floor. But she couldn't get her father's image out of her head. Their first reunion since that day. What had he been thinking while choosing presents alone? In the weeks that followed, Elizabeth sacrificed sleep to carefully select presents for everyone. A cashmere stole for Aunt Martha, a cookbook set her cousin Jennifer had been wanting. The latest games for the children. An expensive necklace for her mother, and the requested brand name bag for her sister. Selecting presents, wrapping them, arranging shipping, it had become her daily routine. The Christmas dinner ingredients list had arrived, and she was asked to handle the house decorations too. While perfectly managing everything, Elizabeth pretended not to notice the exhaustion and loneliness. For the family. It had become like her personal mantra. On Christmas Eve, her mother's house in the suburbs of Greenwich, Connecticut, was already wrapped in holiday spirit. The two-story colonial-style house was outlined with Christmas lights, with warm light spilling from the large windows. Life-sized reindeer illuminations lined the entrance, and icicle lights swayed from the roof's edge. Elizabeth parked her car and let out a deep sigh. The passenger seat and back seat were piled with carefully selected presents. All wrapped with coordinated colors and ribbons, each with a thoughtfully written name card. It should have been perfect preparation. Walking toward the entrance, she checked her outfit. A red cashmere sweater with black pants, and her grandmother's pearl necklace. Simple but elegant attire. Her hair had just been styled at the salon that morning. Before opening the door, she could hear her family's voices, still unaware of her presence. "Where's Elizabeth? She's still not here. I hope she bought exactly what I asked for. Last year she got me something that wasn't my taste at all." Elizabeth faltered for a moment at the various critiques. But she composed herself, adjusted her grip on the heavy gift bags, and pressed the doorbell. "Finally, you're here." Janet, her mother, opened the door. She wore a flashy gold blouse with white pants, and a large diamond necklace at her throat. Behind her stood Caitlin, dressed in the latest designer dress, clutching a new Gucci bag. "Oh, is this all? I thought there'd be more." Janet frowned slightly as she took the gift bags. "There's more in the car," Elizabeth said, and Caitlin rushed outside. "Did you get my Louis Vuitton? From this year's holiday collection, right?" Her sister tried to peek into the bags while carrying presents from the car. "You'll have to wait and see." Elizabeth managed a tired smile. In truth, she had visited 3 stores to find the exact bag Caitlin wanted. It had far exceeded her budget, but she had used her credit card to avoid complaints. The living room was already bustling with relatives. A large wreath adorned the fireplace, and in the corner stood a Christmas tree nearly touching the ceiling. Elizabeth's presents were being arranged beneath it one by one. "Thank you, Elizabeth. You always choose such lovely presents." Aunt Martha warmly called out to her. "You're such a help. You do this every year despite being so busy." Cousin Jennifer said with a smile. Elizabeth politely thanked them while mentally calculating. Martha stole Jennifer's cookbook set. Altogether, this year's presents would cost more than half her salary. Dinner featured a honey-baked ham surrounded by traditional dishes. Yam casserole, green bean casserole, homemade cranberry sauce. Pecan pie and pumpkin pie for dessert. All from catering that her mother proudly announced she had it specially ordered. Elizabeth realized she would be getting that bill too. After dinner, amid rising expectations, Janet stood in the center of the living room. She tapped a glass lightly with a spoon to get everyone's attention. "Now, time for the presents everyone's been waiting for. Elizabeth has prepared wonderful gifts for all of you again this year. She's our family Santa." Applause erupted from the relatives. Caitlin immediately found the box with her name and eagerly began tearing off the wrapping. "Yes. The bag I wanted. This will look amazing on Instagram." Presents were opened one after another. The room filled with cheers and sounds of joy. Elizabeth sat off to the side, watching everyone's reactions. Deep inside, there was a small hope. Maybe this year, for her too. But as the presents dwindled, there was no box with her name. After all the presents had been distributed, Elizabeth finally gathered the courage to ask her mother. "Mom, where's my present?" Suddenly, the room fell silent. Janet answered with a bright smile. "Oh, we didn't prepare a present for you. But you bought everyone else's, right? After all, you're the family Santa." Those words stabbed at her heart. Elizabeth felt her cheeks grow hot. Santa wanting presents? That's hilarious. Caitlin was operating her smartphone while hugging her new bag. Probably already uploading to Instagram. An awkward atmosphere settled among the relatives. Some laughed softly, others looked away. Aunt Martha watched Elizabeth with concerned eyes. Elizabeth slowly stood up. She took a deep breath to keep her voice from trembling. I need some fresh air. No one tried to stop her. Outside, light snow had begun to fall. She got into her car and started the engine. While waiting for the heater to warm up, she rested her forehead against the steering wheel. Why is it always just me? Tears rolled down her cheeks. Outside, the warm lights of her mother's house glowed. The Christmas tree lights flickered, and someone's laughter could be heard. Elizabeth quietly glanced in the rearview mirror. Her perfectly applied makeup was beginning to smear. Last year, the year before, and the year before that. When had it started? She had been expected to be the family Santa, and had accepted it as natural. The joy of giving presents had somehow transformed into a burden. Elizabeth turned off the engine. She couldn't leave yet. She still had her role to play in orchestrating the perfect family Christmas. She fixed her makeup and took a deep breath. Then, once more, she put on a smile. Merry Christmas. She wasn't sure who those words were meant for. 3 days later, in Elizabeth's apartment on Manhattan's Upper East Side. The winter landscape of Central Park spread out before her window. Unlike its usual tidy atmosphere, the desk was piled with unprocessed documents. Elizabeth had been trying to forget Christmas night by immersing herself in work. However, her sister's Instagram posts showing off her new brand name bag and her mother's message saying, "It was such a lovely party, I felt like rubbing salt in an open wound." The heating system in the old brick building made a creaking sound. Outside, the temperature was below freezing, and frost patterns decorated the window panes. Elizabeth was sipping warm tea while preparing a presentation on next quarter's tax strategy. That's when she noticed the answering machine's blue light blinking. Elizabeth. A familiar voice made her hand stop. This is Richard Walker, your father. Her father's voice after 10 years. Elizabeth held her breath. I need to talk to you. Some issues came up in my health checkup. I'd like to meet and talk. Please contact me. That was the end of the message. Simple words with a sincere resonance. Elizabeth remained motionless. Outside the window, the evening cityscape was turning orange. The sunset reflecting off the high-rise windows flickered like countless flames. Various thoughts swirled in Elizabeth's mind. 10 years ago, her father had suddenly left, that's what she had believed. She had accepted without question her mother's words that man abandoned us. But that chance meeting at the mall. Her father's tired expression and gentle gaze. There was no coldness of a man who had abandoned them. The night grew later. Elizabeth couldn't sleep. Finally, at 2 a.m., she made her decision. She left a reply message. I can meet tomorrow. The next morning, Elizabeth chose her suit more carefully than usual. A navy pantsuit with modest pearl earrings. She aimed for a professional impression, avoiding the flashiness she had inherited from her mother. A high-rise in Midtown. The elevator stopped at the top floor. The words, Walker Construction, were engraved on heavy glass doors. Past reception, she was led to a conference room. Her father stood before large windows overlooking the Hudson River. Thank you for coming. Relief colored Richard's voice. Elizabeth maintained her composure and began businesslike. You mentioned health issues. What happened? Richard, sensing his daughter's tension, began explaining slowly. His heart condition had worsened. He might need surgery. And actually, I want you to take over the company. Elizabeth couldn't believe her ears. Why me? We haven't seen each other in 10 years. Not seeing you for 10 years was my fault. But I've been watching over you. Your promotion, your move, and... Richard paused for a moment, meeting her eyes as if gauging her reaction. I also know about the monthly payments you sent to Janet and Caitlin. $2,000, isn't it? The color drained from Elizabeth's face. The transfers she hadn't told anyone about. For her father to know. How do you know? You've been sending that money from your own account. I've been worried about you, so I had lawyers monitor your financial situation. As a father, I was concerned about you struggling. Richard pulled out some documents from his desk. You see, Janet has been receiving sufficient alimony and child support since the divorce. Over $5,000 monthly. Her claim that she received nothing was a lie. Elizabeth felt her world slowly crumbling. A lie. My letters, presents, all were intercepted. I sent you presents every birthday. But they never reached you, did they? Tears welled up in Elizabeth's eyes. I never received anything. She forced out the words in a trembling voice. 10 years of emotions welled up in her chest. Letters and presents from her father, all hidden by her mother. And the monthly payments. Her mother had lied to extract support from her. Richard quietly took his daughter's hand. It was warm and larger than Elizabeth remembered. Losing you was the biggest regret of my life. But I think we can still start over now. Through tear-blurred vision, Elizabeth saw sincere feelings in her father's eyes. I need time to think. Richard nodded understandingly and finally handed her a USB drive. These are records of your bank transactions for the past 7 years. Collected by lawyers. I want you to see for yourself. That night, Elizabeth checked the USB's contents. The screen displayed cold numerical truths. Records of her mother and sister using money from her transfers for luxury brands and lavish trips. Meanwhile, child support from her father went into a separate account, disappearing into their luxurious lifestyle. The family Santa had just been a tool. Outside her apartment window, the winter wind blew strongly. Elizabeth turned up the heating and reached for a wine glass. Her reflection in the glass looked somewhat different. Early January, Elizabeth took her first extended vacation. In her 10 years at Deloitte, she had always worked through the year-end and New Year holidays, rarely taking time off. Her boss looked surprised, but, knowing her work ethic, quickly approved. Manhattan was hit by a severe cold wave. Elizabeth wrapped herself in a warm cashmere coat and headed to her father's company. Over these 2 weeks, she had been moving energetically. First, she stopped the monthly payments to her mother and sister, then began thoroughly analyzing her father's company's financial situation. Walker Construction's office was bustling with activity from the morning. Elizabeth exchanged greetings with employees as she headed to her new office. A plate reading, Elizabeth Walker, CFO, was already mounted on the wall. Good morning, Elizabeth. Richard greeted her with a smile. Her father's complexion had improved. Thanks to proper treatment and lifestyle changes, his heart condition had stabilized. Good morning, Dad. The words were still a bit awkward, but becoming more natural day by day. The morning featured a presentation on new development projects in New York State. Elizabeth impressed the board members with her sharp financial analysis. After the meeting, Richard proudly put his arm around his daughter's shoulders. "You're truly amazing. I really regret not being able to see you these past 10 years. Just then, Elizabeth's phone rang. The screen showed Mom. January 15th. The usual transfer day. Elizabeth, did something happen? This month's money hasn't come in yet. Please hurry. I have house payments to make. Anxiety mixed in her mother's voice. Elizabeth responded calmly. I'm sorry, Mom. I have a new investment plan, so I won't have extra money for a while. What? What are we supposed to do? Janet's voice rose shrilly. You'll have to figure it out yourself. I have my own life to live. She answered firmly and hung up. Over the next 2 weeks, Elizabeth's phone and email overflowed with messages from her mother and sister. We might lose the house. Are you abandoning us? The new season's collection is coming out. What am I supposed to do? You're such a cold daughter. I can't believe this treatment. She recorded all messages and saved every email. Elizabeth was implementing the lesson learned from her father. Keep all evidence. By February, Elizabeth had fully engaged in company management. Her financial knowledge and strategic thinking brought new perspectives to the company. Richard gradually began delegating important decision-making to her, and business partners and employees started recognizing her as the future successor. One morning, news was posted on the company's social media. Walker Construction appoints Elizabeth Walker as new CFO. The photo showed Elizabeth and Richard smiling together. This became the catalyst that changed her mother and sister's attitude. Early March on a chilly Sunday. Elizabeth had just finished yoga at home when sudden loud knocking echoed at her door. Through the peephole, she saw her mother and sister. Open up. We need to talk. Janet's voice echoed in the hallway. Elizabeth opened the door with a sigh. What is it? So early on a Sunday? Her mother and sister burst into the room. Janet, unlike her usual flashy attire, was dressed simply. Caitlin was still decked out in brand names, but her expression was stern. What do you mean by this? Working for that man's company. You traitor. Janet's voice trembled. While we're struggling, you're living in luxury. Caitlin thrust her smartphone forward. The screen displayed the company's news release. At that moment, an unexpected visitor appeared. Elizabeth, I brought yesterday's contract. Richard's voice froze the air in the room. The former couple's first encounter in 10 years. The color drained from Janet's face. You ruined everything. Stealing my daughter from me. Janet screamed. Richard responded calmly. I wasn't even allowed to see my daughter for 10 years. Who stole from whom? Elizabeth realized the moment of decision had come. She opened her laptop and displayed the files she had prepared. Bank transaction records showing her mother and sister's extravagance. Evidence of intercepted letters and presents from her father. Records of the substantial alimony and child support her mother had received. For 10 years, you deceived me. We have no money, your father never gave us anything, it was all lies. Janet and Caitlin were speechless. There was no defense against the evidence. I've always been the family Santa. Giving presents but never receiving any. But from now on, I'll live my own life. With my father. Elizabeth's voice carried unwavering strength. Her mother witnessed the transformation from a little girl to a grown woman. "What are we supposed to do without you?" Janet pleaded, half crying. "Stand on your own feet, Mom. Like I've done." Outside the window, a light spring rain had begun to fall. The seasons were surely changing, and Elizabeth's life was turning to a new page. Christmas Eve that year. In Richard's spacious penthouse in Manhattan's Tribeca district. The large windows offered a view of the sunset sinking into the Hudson River. The Christmas tree was decorated with ornaments Elizabeth had carefully chosen one by one. This year, they were ones she had chosen for herself. "Mind if I check on the turkey?" Michael's voice came from the kitchen. The chief architect from the company's design division, he had been dating Elizabeth for 4 months and had become a symbol of her new life. "Yes, please." Elizabeth smiled by the window. Unlike her previous tired smiles, this one came naturally from her heart. Richard's health had steadily improved. Regular checkups showed good numbers, and his doctor had given him a clean bill of health. As CFO, Elizabeth had contributed to the company's growth, even being featured in the New York Business Journal as a next-generation female executive. "Elizabeth, shall we open the wine?" Richard approached with a bottle in hand. It was a 1964 Bordeaux. "I've been searching for wine from the year you were born," her father said somewhat shyly. "Lost time cannot be recovered." However, father and daughter had begun weaving new memories. Sunday brunches, collaboration at work, and above all, the desire to understand each other. Meanwhile, her mother and sister's lives had changed significantly. They had to give up their luxury apartment and start a more modest life in suburban Connecticut. It must have been hard at first. However, that change brought unexpected growth. Janet started a part-time job at the local library. Reading to children seemed to rekindle her passion from her teaching days. Most importantly, she was learning to live on her own income. Last month, Elizabeth received a letter from her mother. "I'm truly sorry for treating you like a tool. I was foolish. I thought I could only express my worth through material things and money. But I was wrong. When the children at the library look forward to my storytelling, I feel my true worth for the first time." Caitlin had changed too. Instead of boasting about her Instagram followers, she had started working earnestly at a local boutique. "The joy of helping customers find clothes that suit them can't be measured in likes," she had written in a recent message. "Actually, I've invited special guests tonight," Richard quietly announced. Elizabeth looked at her father in surprise. "Mom and Caitlin." Her father nodded. "I think forgiveness is the real gift. Of course, your feelings matter most. No one will blame you if you refuse." Elizabeth thought deeply. Memories of hurt don't disappear easily. But at 7 p.m., they heard the elevator arriving at the upper floor. Janet and Caitlin appeared. Gone were their flashy outfits, replaced by simple but elegant attire. Both held small packages in their hands. "Merry Christmas." Her mother's voice lacked its former arrogance, carrying a hint of humility. Caitlin kept her smartphone tucked away in her bag. "Excuse us," she said in a small voice. The packages they offered contained handmade gifts. From Janet, a carefully knitted cashmere scarf, made during library breaks. From Caitlin, an album created with old family photos. Elizabeth's eyes softened at the nostalgic photos. Her childhood self, family vacations, school events. They truly recorded happy times. After dinner, Janet handed Elizabeth a small box. "This belongs to you. It's a symbol of true family bonds." Inside was her grandmother's ring. A simple diamond ring passed down through generations. For the first time, Elizabeth felt she could truly forgive her mother. Richard distributed champagne glasses. Michael joined them, and a peaceful atmosphere filled the room. To new beginnings. And to true family bonds. Everyone clinked their glasses to her father's words. Outside, large snowflakes had begun to fall silently. The snow illuminated by the lights seemed to be blessing the start of a new family tradition. Elizabeth took a deep breath. This year's Christmas had become a special gift for her. Being freed from the burden of being the family Santa and finding her true self. Learning that both giving and receiving are important. And above all, understanding that real family means respecting and supporting each other. A happy smile played across Elizabeth's profile as she stood by the window.